Hey guys, how you doing? Chris Bennett here, your blockchain beard guy. Hope you guys are doing good, staying safe and healthy in these strange and tumultuous times. Wanted to share some thoughts I've been having with you guys lately about Bitcoin and cryptocurrencies. All this has kind of been front and center at my mind lately because we're starting to see Bitcoin prices go back up. And they're starting to approach, at least at the time of this recording, late in 2020, they're starting to get near the old 2017 highs. And so this has got a lot of people interested in cryptocurrencies and Bitcoin again and just blockchain generally. And as someone who's been working in blockchain for a long time now, fully focused on it and dedicated on it and evaluating the different platforms and putting together courses and teaching students, um, Bitcoin and cryptocurrencies have always been something a little nebulous to me, a little hard to define. And granted, I mean what I'm saying here in the tagline. All this is just kind of an opinion from a financial idiot. I come definitely from a background in technology. I didn't go to school for an economics degree. Um, I'm not an expert in that world. But since getting involved in blockchain, I've kind of taken a new interest in macroeconomics and the definition of money, just because Bitcoin and cryptocurrencies are forcing us to go back and really reevaluate a concept that we've always kind of taken for granted. And that concept is money. We work with money every day, and I think most of us feel like we have a pretty good understanding of it until we really have to go and define what it is. And then it gets a little tough. So here are some of the thoughts I'm having. And hopefully, if you're feeling the same way, this might clarify some of your thinking. You might agree, you might completely disagree. But even if you disagree, maybe some of the ideas here will help you to clarify and sharpen that disagreement and come to a better opinion on your own. And you know what? That's okay. The world's a big place and there's plenty of room for diverse opinions. So, let's start off talking about where money came from. And we'll start with the traditional answer. I think the answer that most of us heard growing up and going to school. And the traditional answer is this, that a long, long, long time ago, before there was money, there was just a bartering system in place. People just traded their goods or their wares back or forth. We didn't have this common store of value of money. And so the idea here is a long time ago, people were just bartering directly with each other. And that this period of direct bartering preceded or at least developed independent of the state. And the traditional story is that people were bartering long before the development of the state. Some narratives say that, hey, this may have happened along similar timelines, archaeologically speaking, but that these were separate developments. And when we talk about the state, what we're really talking about is just any nation state that is sovereign, that's independent, that makes its own rules and uses its own currency. It's not using the currency or the money of another nation state. It is a currency sovereign. And so the story that we're all kind of told is, well, way back in time we had direct bartering. And that worked okay, but there were some problems. Right? Most notably, this coincidence of wants problem. So, in order to solve some of these problems, we came up with this concept of money, this common store of value and exchange. And then later on, after we were using money, came the development of the state. And we talk about problems like the coincidence of wants problem, meaning that in a direct barter society or system, you and I can only trade if you have something that I want and I have something that you want. And this might create a problem because what if our needs don't align? And the example you'll hear in any traditional textbook or treatment of the subject is something like this. You have a cobbler who makes shoes. And that cobbler needs to eat every day. He or she's going to need grain or bread, meat or vegetables to eat. But the farmer who produces that food, well, that farmer may only need new shoes once a year. And so this sets up a problem. And direct bartering wasn't really able to address this, or at least able to address this in a very effective way. And so this left us looking for other solutions, aka money. Well, all this sounds good, but there is a problem with this narrative that always kind of gets left out of the classical treatment. And that is that this direct bartering or trading can only be made possible if there's some kind of social structure in place that's able to provide security. Otherwise, we could arrange a trade and I could just take all your stuff. And there wouldn't be anybody to enforce laws or impose consequences against that kind of behavior. And this security and structure that we talk about are only made possible by something known as the social contract, an idea in philosophy, which talks about humans. Humans originally existing in the state of nature before there was any society, any social structure, any rules, when we lived much closer to animal lives than we do human lives. And in this state of nature, humans had absolute and total freedom. They could do whatever they want. The very definition of the state of nature is one in which there really are no rules. There are no authorities to impose those rules or to impose consequences for violating those rules. But this absolute freedom didn't really work well for us. We desired to give up a bit of that freedom to come together and form societies and to make up rules and to designate authorities to impose those rules and consequences for not adhering to those rules. In other words, we decided to trade a bit of our freedom for a bit of safety and security and structure. And this is an idea known as the social contract, and philosophers over the ages have had various arguments about exactly what the right trade-off is, exactly how much freedom should be exchanged for how much security and structure. But all philosophers agree on the basic tenets or basic idea of the social contract. So this direct bartering, it's only going to be made possible in a society that has some sort of social contract in place. And so you can start to see the problem with the original timeline we were given. Direct bartering could not have preceded the development of the state. It couldn't have even developed alongside the state. By this definition, the state had to precede direct bartering because it is the state which provides this security and stability which allows markets to form. If you don't have that kind of safety and security and stability, a thriving market is never going to form. So by this definition, economies are an artifact of the social contract. They're a product of the social contract. Forming a working social contract results in a thriving economy. And by that definition, we can't really see thriving economies existing before the social contract or the state. Now, let's talk about what the state wants, right? In order to get this kind of security and structure that would allow markets and economies to form and to flourish, the government or the state needs people to do things. All right, we're going to need police to enforce the rules. We're going to need some kind of military to protect the state from threats of other states or external actors. We're going to need to have some kind of healthcare system in place to take care of our citizens and keep them healthy. It's important that we have an education system in place to educate new generations and to help them take the reins of the state and manage it appropriately. Art, engineering, culture, we need all of these things. So in order for the social contract to work, we need people to do things. And that means that governments or the states need a way to incentivize people to go do those things. Um, Otherwise, we're not going to have a society. And governments have tried various methods of incentivizing folks to go do the things the state needs them to do. And one of the things history has shown time and time again is that you can get people to work for the state through force and coercion and fear and intimidation. But this doesn't work very well, and these approaches are generally short-lived. And when they break down, they often break down in ugly and violent ways. If there's a way that we can incentivize participation, if we can make citizens want to perform these services for the state rather than forcing them to, this turns out to be a much better approach. So how do we incentivize citizens to do all the things they need to do so the state can provide the safety and security and stability for markets to thrive so people can trade and exchange? Well, we can do that through money. So, by definition, right, the state is an independent actor with the ability to create its own currency. Right? It uses its own money. Well, that means that a national government in a nation state that uses its own money has a monopoly on the creation of money or the manufacturing of money. Now, if you have a monopoly on something, you may want a lot of things in the world, but the one thing you will never, ever want will be the thing you have a monopoly on. Let's say there was only one manufacturer on planet Earth of chocolate chip cookies, and that was you. Nobody else in the world could manufacture chocolate chip cookies. All of the world's cookies came from you. You might want a lot of things in life. More money, a speedboat, a big house, a private island. But the one thing in life you would never, ever want is a chocolate chip cookie. Because anytime you wanted one, you could have one. You would never be without it. So if you made a list of all the things you wanted or desired on life, that chocolate chip cookie would never be on it. And all monopolies are like this. Monopolies may want something, but the thing they want, by definition, is never going to be the thing they have a monopoly on. So before the breakup, when AT&T had a monopoly on the long-distance phone market here in the United States, AT&T may have wanted a lot of things, but the one thing they were never in need of was the ability to place a long-distance call. They were the monopoly. And this means if governments are the monopoly that can manufacture currency or money, well, then the one thing they don't need is money. And by the way, this means the risk of governments ever not being able to pay their debt or to pay a bill is zero, as long as that government exists. If the thing you have a monopoly of is money, if you are the only one in the world who can manufacture new money, would you ever worry about a bill showing up in your mailbox? Absolutely not, because you could always make the money to pay for it. Now, what about inflation, you might be wondering? We'll get to that. But first, let's talk about what governments really do want. If governments don't want money because they can always just go manufacture more of it, well, then what is it they're really after? What they really want is people to do stuff. Remember, we need to incentivize citizens to do all the things to provide the safety and security and stability in our societies that will allow markets to flourish. And societies benefit both from public sector labor and private sector labor. So it's not just the government directly employing people to go out and do these things. Also, letting these services be addressed through the private sector provides social benefit as well. Both types of labor help strengthen the overall society and provide more of this security and structure. So governments create money as a way to incentivize people to do the stuff they want done. This provides incentive because people want that money. People want money because it has value. And we're going to talk in just a minute about where this value comes from. So if people want money and the government has all the money, people are incentivized to go out and do the type of work the government wants us to do to create the type of society that we want to live in. So, let's take a little side tour. Let's imagine that we go off and we form our own country. In our new country, we have a national government, and our national government is sovereign and independent, and we all use our own form of money. And only our national government has the legal authority to manufacture that money. Now imagine our new country has a large river going right down the middle. And on the eastern half of our country, we have big, beautiful, rich forests. And on the western half of our country, we have wide open, grassy plains. So the eastern half of our country is great for lumber and timber. The western half of our country is great for grain and food. Well, people in the east are going to need to eat the food that's grown in the west, and people in the west are going to need to build homes out of the lumber that's grown in the east. So what we really need for our new country to be successful is we need a bridge over this big river in the middle. Because without a bridge, it's going to be really difficult to get the grain from the west to the east and to get the lumber from the east to the west. And our country as a whole would benefit from the creation of this bridge. So our government meets and talks about it and decides, you know what? This bridge is in the best interests of our newly formed nation. So we as the government should build this bridge. So the government decides to build the bridge. Well, how can our government get the citizens of our newly formed country to go out and build this bridge? Well, we know that we can pay the money. That's an incentive. All right, well, where are we going to get this money from? Well, traditional logic says that government expenditures are paid for through taxes. And at the state or local or regional level, this is absolutely true. But at the national or federal level, this isn't. Think about this. If we're a newly formed country, and the very first thing our government wants to spend money on is this bridge, they cannot pay for that bridge using tax revenue. And that is because we're a newly formed country. And that means none of our citizens have any of our money yet. So the government can't collect any taxes because we don't have any money to pay those taxes. And if we don't have any money to pay those taxes, they're not going to collect any tax revenue and they're not going to have any money to build the bridge. So how in the world are we going to pay for this bridge? Well, remember, we can go manufacture new money. We can just print money. And we can use that money to pay the citizens to go build the bridge. This is great because this is going to give money to those citizens to go spend in their own local economies as well, to spend in their local barbershops and beauty salons and grocery stores and parks and zoos and all their community businesses. So, this turns another classical explanation that we've always gotten on its head, and that is that the government must first collect tax revenue before it can go spend that tax revenue on something. Well, again, at the federal or national level, if a government has the authority to print its own money, that's actually not the way it works. We actually spend the money first, and then we tax it back later. Right? Because again, if it worked the way we're always told, how would we have built that bridge? How would any new nation have done the very first thing it did? Now, if you've been listening to all this, you're probably wondering, well, what about inflation, right? You can't just go printing money and paying people because of inflation, because that money will lose value, because you're just constantly increasing the money supply. Well, this is where taxation comes in. Taxes aren't how national governments pay for things. Taxes are how national governments remove money from the money supply to control inflation. We know that money in our newly created society is going to have value because it's in demand, because people want it. But why do people want money? What creates that demand? Why would people prefer our money instead of just using some other form of exchange, some other nation's money, or just making up their own currency to use in their own regions or localities? Well, the reason money has value is because the state can do something very special. They can levy taxes. And when a state levies taxes, they can also demand that those taxes are paid in a certain form or a certain currency. So, for example, in the United States, taxes are only payable in US dollars. And I'm sure in any other country, in your country, it's exactly the same way. If I know I have to pay taxes and I can only pay those taxes in the government's money, well, that means I'm going to need to get my hands on some of that government's money. So I have some of it so I can pay my taxes when the taxes come due. And this creates the incentive or the demand for the government's money. Everybody has to pay their taxes, and these taxes are only payable in the government's money. And the reason the government collects these taxes is to create demand for the money and to control inflation. And this actually happened. This is not an abstract thing. This happened early on in America. This happened in the colonies. Many colonies issued, we'll talk about why here in a minute, many colonies before the formation of the United States issued their own money, their own currency. And they had varying success with this. Some colonies were very successful, and others weren't. And I thought this was a great quote from Sharon Ann Murphy in the book Other People's Money, How Banking Worked in the Early American Republic. She says, the experience of the colonies with this fiat paper money varied widely. In those areas where money was limited in quantity to the amount of anticipated future tax receipts, fiat money tended to be successful. But some colonial legislatures acted irresponsibly, issuing fiat money well in excess of future receipts, printing new notes before earlier paper money issues had been collected and destroyed, and or failing to include a specific date or means for retirement of the money. This resulted in price inflation and depreciation of the currency. So it's important that when we issue money, we tax most of it back out, creating demand for the money and controlling inflation or the devaluation of the money. So what do we do in our newly formed nation if we want to build this bridge? Well, it's pretty simple. We manufacture a bunch of new money. We use that money to pay our citizens to build this bridge that we're all going to benefit from. Then at the end of the year, we collect a tax payable only in the money we just issued. We don't collect all of the money back in taxes, but we collect a significant portion of it. And the money we collect in taxes, we destroy, we burn, we take out of circulation. And then we go all the way back to step one next time we need to pay for something. And we manufacture a new batch of money and start the cycle all over again. Now, like I said, this isn't something abstract. This isn't the proposal of a new way of doing things. This is just the way it's always worked. Like I said, this happened early on in American history, in the colonial era. You see, before America became its own nation, the official currency in the American colonies was the British pound. But British pounds were in short supply because the American colonies ran enormous trade deficits. We were importing far more from the British than we were exporting. And this made sense. This was a newly forming nation. We didn't have the infrastructure yet. We were still building that. Well, this meant that British pounds were physically in extremely short supply in the colonies. There just weren't enough of them to go around. And if money is in short supply, naturally there are going to be inflationary pressures. Deflationary pressures. The value of the money is going to go way up. But beyond that, it can also create problems if there just physically isn't enough money to exchange. Well, then using that form of currency just isn't going to be practical or isn't going to be workable. And this led many of the early colonies, or later to become states, to issue their own state-issued fiat currency. And these colonies did exactly what we talked about when we thought about forming our new nation. They levied taxes, and these taxes were only payable in the state-issued currency. The British actually tried twice to ban this practice. They were relatively unsuccessful at it. But the Currency Acts of 1751 and 1764 were both explicit attempts to ban this practice and to force the colonies to use nothing but British pounds. So if we step back and we ask ourselves, okay, now that we understand a little bit more about where money comes from and what gives it value and what taxes are really doing, well then, okay, what is money? Well, we can see that money is a legal tool. It's something created within the legal framework of a society. And this legal tool is created and used by sovereign governments. And this tool is used because those governments need to encourage people to go out and do things. Those governments want to organize labor. They want people to go out and do the things that are going to create a safe and secure and stable society, which will allow markets to develop and flourish. So money is an instrument which organizes labor and efforts to benefit the overall society at large. Money has value because it's in demand. The reason it's in demand is because the state can levy taxes, which is only payable in that state's money. And this has a downstream or knock-on effect. If you and I are going to trade or exchange with each other, we could use any way to exchange value. We could barter directly. You and I could create our own currency that is only used between you and I. Our town could create its own currency. So we have many choices, but the choice that we're likely to use is just to use the state's money. Why? Because we already have some. It's already in our pockets. We already need to have some to pay our taxes. So why go out and create a whole new form of money if we can just already use what's in our pockets? It's a matter of convenience. And over time, this makes the state-issued money the standard money for a nation-state. Remember, the government can levy these taxes for the entirety of existence. As long as there is a government, that government can levy taxes payable only in that money. And as long as that government exists, that same government can also manufacture new money as much as it wants. That means there's never going to be a bill or an interest payment come due that a sovereign government will not be able to pay. All right, so what about Bitcoin and cryptocurrencies? How do they line up with this definition of money? Is Bitcoin a legal tool? Is it the creation of the state? No, it's not. It's a technological development. It's a network protocol. Is Bitcoin the creation of the sovereign government? No, it's the creation of an independent community of like minded people who were interested in solving a very difficult and fascinating problem about managing ledgers and keeping records. Is Bitcoin something which encourages and organizes labor for the overall larger benefit of society as a whole? No, not really. Bitcoin and cryptocurrencies don't really play any role at all in either encouraging or organizing labor or work efforts. And finally, is Bitcoin or other cryptocurrencies, are they valued because they're the only way in which you can pay state levied taxes? Absolutely not. In fact, more often than not, Bitcoin and cryptocurrencies can't be used to pay any kind of debt to the state. So based on this definition, is Bitcoin money? No, it's not. But we know Bitcoin is something. So what is it? Well, if Bitcoin isn't money, then it must be a way of transferring money or transferring value. And the Bitcoin blockchain is just nothing more than a decentralized ledger, a bunch of records. Records of debits to one account and credits to another. That makes Bitcoin a financial tool. And it makes it a tool just like other financial tools we're used to. Things like your checking account or a credit card account. These are also ledgers. When you write a check against your checking account, your bank is making an entry on the ledger, which debits your account and credits another account. When you make a charge on your credit card company is making a debit to your account and a credit to somebody else's account. Exactly the same way that Bitcoin works. So to say that Bitcoin is money makes about as much sense as saying a credit card is money. A credit card isn't exactly money. A credit card is a means of transferring money via a ledger. Think about a traveler's check. A traveler's check isn't money. A traveler's check is a means of transferring money. Again, by using a ledger. Think about a PayPal account, making a PayPal payment. PayPal isn't money, it's a means of transferring that money. How? Because PayPal keeps a ledger. And when you make a PayPal transaction, your account is debited and another account is credited. Now, what makes Bitcoin or cryptocurrencies interesting and frankly confusing at this point is, by and large, none of these other means of transferring value have any volatility. Right? If I write a check for $20 today, it's worth $20 tomorrow. If I buy one Bitcoin today for $100, it might be worth $200 tomorrow or $10 tomorrow. There's an extreme volatility to Bitcoin and cryptocurrencies which doesn't exist with these other ways of transferring value via ledgers. Now, does this make sense? To me, not really. Logically, to me, this makes as much sense as saying, hey, I'm going to invest in credit cards in the hope that I strike it rich. Now, I'm not denying that money can't be made off the arbitrage. Certainly, many people have done so. But thinking about all this in depth has really kind of led me to the belief that all of this volatility is simply coming from a fundamental misunderstanding of what Bitcoin and cryptocurrencies are. That they're not really money, that they're really just a way of transferring value. So if you ask me, does Bitcoin have value? I would say absolutely yes, it does. But that value doesn't come from the fact that it's money. That value comes from the fact that it's used to transfer money. It's a form of payment. It's a ledger, just like any of these other approaches we've talked about. A checking account, a traveler's check, a PayPal account, etc. What makes Bitcoin and cryptocurrencies unique is that they're a decentralized method for transferring value or money. that now the transfer of value and money can be democratized. It does not have to go through large centralized institutions or gatekeepers. That this means of transferring value or money is something that is now community owned and developed. And this decentralization can add a great deal of data integrity. So I hope you don't misunderstand this. I believe there's a tremendous value to Bitcoin and cryptocurrencies. But I think right now we're fundamentally misunderstanding what that value is. And I think all of this starts because early on, when we're all going to school, we're told a story about money that it turns out isn't quite true. Like I said, you may agree with this, you may disagree with this. Either way, I hope it helps sharpen and clarify some of your thinking. If you're interested in any of this material, I'm going to put a link to the slide deck in the description below. And if you want to dive deeper into some of these ideas, check out this last slide. I've got some good follow-up reading, some materials and articles and books that I read that were really foundational to the formation of my ideas and the things I presented here. So if you made it through this much, thanks for listening to me. I hope this has been interesting. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Tell me what you think in the comments below. Do you agree? Do you disagree? Do you think this makes sense? Do you think I'm full of it? I'd love to hear what you think because we all can learn together. All this is brand new, and I think even if you disagree with my definition, you probably agree with my assertion that we're all still trying to figure this out and learn together. So I hope you guys are doing good. We'll chat again soon. This is Chris Bennett, your blockchain beard guy. Take care.